Hey folks, Lester Smith here for some spontaneous solo roleplay using my Bookmark No HP RPG rules and the GameMaster's Apprentice Oracle deck from Larcenous Designs. To learn more about these game rules, check the URL over there. And I'm very proud of these things. I think you will find that they are not just your average rules light role-playing game. All right. You'll see that my RPG setup here is pretty basic. I've just got a notepad, pencil, eraser. This is my character sheet right here, and the Oracle deck, which you'll learn more about this and the role-playing game rules as we go. This is just to keep notes. This is because I'm messy keeping notes. Um, the player character sheet should speak for itself. And this thing over here, this nifty little thing, is called coin sides. And when I have a small footprint to work within, I like to use this thing. It can replicate any type of die. So this side is D6, counting 1 to 6 on the main points, or you'll see a 12 here. If you use these and the secondary points, it's a D12. This side has a D4 expanded to a D8, and it also has a D10 around the outside edge, the raised numbers, which expand to a D20 with the flat numbers. I love this thing. I backed their Kickstarter, and you can find a link where to get one of these yourself if you like on that URL over there again. Okay, so I'm starting out from scratch with nothing but a basic idea for a character. I like to play mages and other supernatural creatures, but I also wanted to try a Western setting, and I couldn't decide between the two for this, so I decided to combine them. And I'm going to play a character who is a bounty hunter in the Old West, but also a spirit mage. Nowadays would be called a medium, I suppose. Her whole thing is that she can communicate with the spirits of the dead, and I'm thinking that probably she became an adventurer because someone close to her was murdered, and that's the first bounty that she has set off for. I don't know who was murdered yet. Doesn't really matter at this point. We'll just get started. So, I don't even have a name, and I'm going to use the deck for that. There's a set of names here, and they tend to be male, probably female, gender non-specific. And I want to play a gal, but I'm not thrilled with the name Betty, so let's skip that one. Julia, ooh, that's tempting. I'm going to look at one more. Sean, I guess is how to pronounce that. Let's go with Julia. And I want to see if maybe these can suggest a last name as well. Uh, I like Jacob, but Julia Jacobs is too much like a comic book name. So let's try another one. Julia Baily. That sounds good. And she is a bounty hunter, medium. I decided that dealing with the spirits of the dead would take a lot of willpower, so I'm going to assign her biggest die, the D10, to will, and I want her to be fairly quick-witted, so we'll put my second die, the 8, here. I don't want her to be clumsy, so we'll put the 6 here, and that leaves a 4 for brawn, and I'm picturing her as a small, petite gal. She's brand new, so we don't have any other things here, specifically boons. I am going to give her a horse. I'm going to give her a pony just for role-playing purposes, and a rifle because I don't think she is the type who would carry a 6-shooter. Instead, a rifle in one of those holsters on her pony. And I guess a Bible just sounds good for her, especially being a spiritist type. Okay, so I know that I want to set her off on her first bounty, and I don't know exactly what that is. So we're going to use the catalyst and location as some sort of indication. So catalyst, I have a miracle occurs, and I guess we'll just go with the thing that has launched her off on her new career is that she discovers that she's a medium when this person close to her died. And let's see where that happened at a base. So I'm thinking this is one of those cavalry bases out in the Old West. So in a drier desert part of the terrain, not too close to a city. And this is making me think that the person who was close to her was actually someone on the base. So let's go ahead and generate an NPC for this person. And using the GameMaster's Apprentice setup to generate an NPC, to make a character, first draw 3 cards, take a name from one, a virtue and vice from the next, and belongings from the third. So we'll figure that the last name is Baily. And I like to turn these over so that I don't know what's on the card itself. I didn't see it sitting there. So we've got this NPC, Remiel. Sounds like a nice biblical name. And of course, Baily, murdered. So what do we know about Remiel? Well, let's see. Virtue, diligence. And vice, sloth. Well, those are two that seem to be opposite to each other. So I think this is one of those situations described by General Frieder von Hammerstein-Eckford, or Eckerd, who said that the officers who go farthest are intelligent and lazy because they know how to delegate, and that's what the sloth will come in. Those who came second farthest were those who were intelligent and industrious. Those less than that, below that, were stupid and lazy. And the worst sort of officer you can imagine is lazy and industrious. And I'll let you imagine why on your own there. Okay, so we have Remiel Baily murdered. I'm thinking this is probably her father. And you know what? Let's go ahead with a yes/no question to see. I think the likelihood is good. So we're going to see what this has to say. And yes, it is her father. Now, before I put that card away, so this is her father, murdered somehow. I'm going to use this thing called tension level that keeps track of when we might have a random encounter. So tension level starts at 6. Whenever we do a yes/no question, we look at this difficulty number over here. That number comes in handy for a lot of things. If it is less than the current number, then there is a random encounter, a random scene. So we got to remember that. And we drop to 1, and it's going to raise as we go along. So where was I? It is her father. We're going to have a random encounter. Do we want to know if he was the base commander? And I think let's just go ahead and with a random encounter, see if that suggests something. So for a random encounter, this suggests draw 2 or 3 cards, take the verb from one and the noun from another, and the adjective from the third if you are using 3 cards. So here we go. We're going to, I looked at this card already, right? Here we go. So for a verb, we have defenestrate, and for a noun, we have salvation. And let's use an adjective just to see. Aggressive. To me, this sounds like it was at the fort's chapel, and this officer was pushed out a window. It has to have been pretty high, so we'll say it was the steeple, and that's an unusual place to have a meeting. So I think there must have been something going on here, maybe some sort of spy. And that to me suggests that her father was not the base commander, but instead was a lower officer investigating the base commander, and has been pushed out a window to his death. And I think Julia saw it, or at least she saw her father falling, saw his death, and caught sight of a figure up there who was the guy who killed him. So what does Julia do? I think we know enough about her that she is a person of action. So I think she immediately chases after this figure. She goes rushing to the base of the bell tower. And we've already decided that this is her first bounty, which means that whoever it is got away. The question is whether she saw who it was or it's a mysterious figure. For this, we're going to roll, and we'll need a difficulty level. So let's turn up a card. Ooh, only a 3. Okay, given our difficulty of 3, I've decided that I'm going to use her grace to see if she runs up there in time rather than one of her higher attributes. So here we go. I need the 6-sider, and we're going to roll it here. Give it a good spin. And I read the number that isn't partly covered. So we have a 4, a 1, this means a failure, and a 6. So this is a fail high 6. So she did not see the killer. And because she failed, she actually takes a bit of damage here. So her 6 is now in effect a 4 until she's had a chance to rest and get better. All right, so we're going to keep that there. So she didn't see who it was, and we don't know who it was. So I think she rushes back, and her father is dead. She doesn't have a chance to speak with him, and she is not sure where to go from here. So she goes home to grieve and to think about how she's going to proceed. So we know that the spirit of her father is going to appear to her, because we've decided that is how she becomes a medium, or how she realizes that she has this power that I suppose she's gotten from, let's say, her grandmother. Because otherwise it would have already been obvious to her. So it makes sense for it to have skipped a generation. I just like that idea. Do we need to do a scene setting for this? And frankly, I don't think so. Though it might be interesting to see what her father has to say to her. And for this, I'm going to use these tag symbols, they're called. So let's turn up the next one. And we have, looks like a wand, a heart, and a sword. Okay, the wand, magic, technology, or strangeness. The heart is family, friendship, romance. And the sword is conflict, disagreement, battle. Well, you know what? That seems pretty clearly matches what we've decided about her already. So her father appears to her and charges her with tracking down her killer. We know that this has to be a bounty situation, so that means this person has to already be known as a killer, probably a contract killer, which leaves Julia having to discover who contracted this guy to kill her father and why. The question is, how does she find out? Does her father know the identity of this killer? And I think the chances for this are even. So let's turn up the next card and see. Yes, her father does know the killer, which says some things about the situation that he was investigating. We'll figure those things out later. But let's come up with a name. And first we'll go with gender. Odds, it's a male. Evens, it's a female. And odds, it's a guy. So we'll come up with a name. This is Bartleby. And last name, does something work here? Thalden. I've never heard that name before. And what do we know about Bartleby? Let's see how experienced he is. We're going to draw another one of these random numbers for a scale of 1 to 10. And he is a 7. He's pretty well known. We can worry about his stats later, but let's find a virtue. Mercy, that seems odd. And a vice, fraud. Him being a killer, I think we're going to swap which one of these is the primary thing. Fraud overshadows his mercy. Maybe there's something, some particular trigger that makes him merciful in a specific situation. So I paused recording for a few minutes to go online searching for where historically there were forts in the Old West, and that took me to the history of Salt Lake City, and I began to realize I was going down this path of research that is a heck of a lot of fun, that is exciting because of everything that you learn. But then I also remembered that this is why I never finished my story in A Thousand-Year-Old Vampire. I got bogged down in the history of the origins of Moscow, where my vampire had gotten to after about 300 years, and I never finished. You're supposed to write only a few sentences at a time for each major event in your vampire's life, and I was writing more like a mini paragraph. Which then brought to mind something that I had initially wanted to talk about in this video anyway, which is the experience of being a game master versus being a player. If you have never been a game master in an adventure before, this solo setup of play is a good way to begin practicing some skills that you'll need. If you have been a game master before, then you'll know that even in published adventures where you're reading paragraphs of description and then the adventure tells you what's in the next room, you still have to extrapolate. You still have to make some things up. You still have to play the roles of the characters and what they say. That's what's happening in solo roleplay with an oracle of some sort. The deck gives you some information which you then extrapolate from as a game master and then react to as a player. Now, if you've ever played in a game run by a game master who is too much into the historical details of something or the science behind it, you realize that it begins to feel like a college lecture instead of an adventure, and I want to stay away from that. So we are going to not have this in the Fort Douglas, 3 miles east of Salt Lake City in 1850 or 1851, a few years after Salt Lake was originally established and Utah was still a territory, not an actual state, and yada, yada, yada. This instead is a fort about 10 miles away from the nearest town, typical Western town that you see in a TV show or movie. Which takes us to the subject of Julia finding this bounty. Would the wanted poster be at the fort? I think not. Or this killer would have risked too much being identified. But there is a chance. So I'm going to say bad odds. We're going to turn up a card and see what prompt we get. The odds are bad. No, there is not a wanted poster at the fort for this particular killer. And you'll notice we have a difficulty number of 5, which is above our 1, unsurprisingly. So it doesn't start a new scene, and instead our 1 goes to a 2. Tension level 2. We can, however, name this fort and maybe name the town nearby. So I'm going to draw a card and rely on a couple of things, names and also belongings, to suggest the nature of the town. And you'll notice I'm using these cards quite a lot. Nothing says that you have to. All right, Edmund, Heather, Evander. Let's call this Fort Edmund. And we might as well call the town Edmund City. And I forgot, we were going to check belongings. Child, toy, stuffed animal, colored ball, puzzle cube. So I'm thinking when Julia rides into town, there is a circus that has come to town. One quick question on my mind is why Julia would even come into town. She seems the type to just act on her impulses. Now, I'm imagining that Julia's purpose for coming to town was just specifically to find out if anyone knew anything about this stranger. And she did see the man fleeing, so she'd be able to describe the person. Her father, given this diligence and sloth, would have advised her pretty strongly to go down to the sheriff's office, find the bounty, so that she can at least pay her way in the world as she's hunting down this killer. From this point on, I am going to assume that Julia's father isn't like following her and whispering in her ear nonstop. I wanted her to be a sort of mage, a medium, and so she has to invite the spirits of the dead. She has to call them from the other side. So at this point, she's on her own in terms of figuring out what to do next. So she rides into town, discovers this circus, and I sort of want to know, is it just setting up? Has it been here for a while, or are they tearing down? My thought is if they are tearing down, there's a possibility that Bartleby Felden might be traveling with the circus. So let's just go with maybe some sensory details to see what that suggests to us. Here's the sensory detail area, what you hear, see, touch, or smell. And you don't have to use all of them. So she hears the creaking and groaning of, and a blackened skull, and a phlegmy cough racks your body, and a dusty cellar. Wow, none of that seems to fit with a happy circus. It more suggests to me something like Dark's Carnival from Something Wicked This Way Comes. So let's go with that. So I think Julia comes riding into town. Her horse has just been walking. But as they're approaching town, she kicks it into a little bit of a trot. And then she sees this gypsy caravan on the outside of town. And if I were game mastering this for someone else at this point, I would throw some sort of a conflict in. So that's what I'm going to do here. So a mob of townsfolk are harassing the gypsy band. They don't want them there. And it's probably the local preacher and some of the merchants, maybe the local saloon. They don't want the competition. The question is, how hot is the situation right now? And for that, I'm just going to turn up a card. And it's a 4. So it's not super contentious at the moment. It's not ready to break out into a fight, but there's some name calling going on. And I think I want to draw an elemental symbol to suggest how the leader of the gypsy caravan is approaching this right now. And this is wind, which the elemental symbols key suggests movement and curiosity. So I think the leader of the band is trying to reason with the townsfolk, offering them some food and drink and some dance and maybe free fortune telling, because I think this is happening in the evening, that Julia is riding into town toward the end of the day, after sunset, actually. So she's hearing the noise of all of this. Now, as the leader of the band, I think this guy is pretty skillful and pretty glib tongue. So I'm going to give him a D10 in wits, and that's what I'm going to use. How difficult is it to convince the townspeople? To cool them down. Oh, it's a difficulty of 8. This is going to be tough. Before I forget, let me write down what's happening. Julia comes into town in the evening. There's a gypsy band confronted by townspeople. Gypsy leader tries to calm them. Okay, so my gypsy leader has to roll 8 10-sided dice. And I like to use Google Dice for this sort of thing when I'm working online at least. We need 8 10-siders. We'll get rid of all the rest of these. And here we go. Oh, the one tells me he failed. He fails with a high 10. So it sounds to me like he has done some smooth talking, but they are packing up to leave, and he's just trying to keep things cool as they get everything packed up. This doesn't give me the conflict I was hoping for, though. So I think despite his calm speaking, some coward in the back of the crowd of townspeople throws a rock. And all hell breaks loose. It turns into a brawl. Julia doesn't have a lot of patience with this. She's on horseback. They're all on foot. So I think she wades into the fray, trying to use the physicality of her horse and possibly her own booted foot from time to drive the two apart. Now, she rested last night, so I'm going to say that whatever she did to her ankle trying to chase that villain yesterday has healed up. That's my call. But as a game master, I would certainly tell a player that's the case. All right, so she wades into the situation. It was a difficulty 8. And the gypsy leader failed. So this is going to be an 8 for her as well. It's in effect combat. So I'm going to use her best stat, her D10. And the question is, do I want to gamble her vocation to have that difficulty? And I do. So she is gambling her vocation. And I think this means sort of a mix between a bounty hunter's fighting skill and her sensitivity as a medium. So difficulty 4. Here we go. And I need a D10, other side. Here we go. And I got My raised number that isn't covered is a 10 and another 10 and a 6 and a 2. All right, so that is a success high 10. One thing in the system, whenever you max out a die, it means that that die has actually grown. You've learned something. So Julia now has a will of D12, and she has just become better at handling this kind of situation, or any situation that I end up using will for. So one thing to mention in this situation in terms of the role-playing game, I could use any of these stats as long as I can rationalize a reason for using that. And in this case, the will to physically force herself into a potentially lethal situation. So she gets the 2, the crowd pushed away from the gypsy band, and the crowd heads back into town, grumbling and muttering. And the gypsies are very impressed with our Julia for having helped them out. And so I think they take her in for the evening. You know, in these sorts of stories, Gypsy Band always has a fortune teller as part of the band, right? You know, the crystal ball and everything. So I think that person would recognize the mediumship beginning to grow within our young heroine, and I'm actually going to use that to explain why this stat has gone up, because overnight in conversing with the gypsy fortune teller, Julia learns more about controlling this new ability in her. Now, I haven't actually had any combat, which I was hoping for, but this seems a good place to stop this adventure with her staying overnight with these gypsies. If you liked this video, I hope that you'll click the like button below and maybe leave a comment. One of the things I'm most interested in is knowing whether you think Julia should travel with these gypsies, whether they might help her further in her quest, or whether she should just leave them in the morning and head on into town. And if so, how are the townsfolk going to react to Julia coming in? And I'm finding the unfolding story interesting. So thanks for watching. Catch you later.